His hand closed around my wrist before I could take another step. The force of it stopped me, not violently, but deliberately, enough to be seen. The music inside the ballroom faltered, as if the entire room had felt it. Conversations thinned, heads turned. Lady Harrington froze mid-laugh. The Earl of Devon lowered his glass. Every eye shifted toward the terrace, toward us. Duke Alastair Ravenscroft stood close, too close, his grip firm, his presence cutting through the night air like a blade. To them it looked like control, like a man putting a woman in her place, a scandal unfolding in real time. "You have a remarkable talent," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear, "for appearing exactly where you are least wanted." He expected resistance, a flinch, a protest, a scene. I gave him none of it. Instead, I lifted my chin slightly, just enough for the candlelight to catch my face, and let the silence stretch. I did not pull away. I did not acknowledge his grip. I simply looked at him, as if this moment had already happened, as if I had been waiting for it. The tension shifted, not broken, but redirected. They thought they were watching a confrontation, a duke asserting power over his late brother's widow. They were wrong. I could feel the storm gathering beyond the hills, the first distant rumble threading through the air. He thought he had stopped me. He had no idea. He had just stepped exactly where I needed him to. He did not move. For a moment that stretched thin and sharp, the world was only the cold marble under my gloves and the heat of his gaze. The whispers from the ballroom crescendoed, a chorus of judgment and morbid curiosity. They saw a wolf cornering a lamb. I inclined my head, a gesture of polite dismissal, and stepped around him as if he were nothing more than a misplaced piece of furniture. I re-entered the ballroom, my spine straight, and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant. Alastair remained on the terrace, a silhouette of frustrated power against the darkening sky. He expected me to run. A cornered animal flees. A queen holds her ground. His cousin, Caspian, glided to my side, his expression a perfect mask of concern. "Eleanor, are you well? Alastair can be possessive of this family's honor." I met his sympathetic eyes and saw nothing but the polished surface of a well-told lie. "The Duke is merely finding his footing," I replied smoothly. "We must all be patient with him." Later I found myself in the card room. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the low murmur of wagers. I was observing a game of whist when his voice cut through the noise, closer than I expected. "I trust you are not gambling away the last of my brother's legacy." He stood behind my chair, his presence a palpable weight. The other players fell silent, their eyes darting between us. This looked like another attack, a continuation of his public crusade against me. It was the perfect opportunity to appear fragile, to defend my honor. I did neither. I turned my head slightly, my gaze trailing over the cards on the table. "Extravagance is a statement, Duke. One must simply choose carefully what one says." My calm, almost academic response seemed to unmoor him. He expected a fight or a plea, not a philosophical counter. He saw a brazen spendthrift. I allowed him to. His confusion was a far more valuable asset than his understanding. He lingered for a moment too long, his knuckles brushing the velvet of my chair. To anyone watching, it was a moment of intense, unresolved tension. It looked like the prelude to a forbidden affair. The rumble of thunder finally broke, a deep, guttural sound that shook the manor's old bones. Guests began to murmur about their carriages. I excused myself, not toward the grand exit, but toward the east wing, toward the library. It was my late husband's sanctuary, filled with first editions and the scent of leather and rain. As predicted, Alastair followed. He found me tracing the spine of a book on estate management. The first fat drops of rain splattered against the tall, arched windows. "This is your final performance, Eleanor," he said, his voice raw. "A pensive widow hiding in a library. The act is wearing thin." The wind howled, and a frantic gust blew the terrace doors open, scattering loose papers across the floor. A footman rushed in, apologizing profusely. "The storm is upon us, Your Grace, Your Highness. We must secure the house." Alistair's eyes locked on mine, a flicker of dark triumph in them. The storm was his ally, a cage descending upon us. He thought it was chance. He believed nature itself was conspiring to give him the time he needed to finally break me. The heavy oak door of the library clicked shut behind the departing servant, sealing us in. That sound was not an accident. It was the next move. The click of the lock was a period on a sentence I had written long ago. The storm raged outside, a wild, percussive symphony against the glass, but inside the library a new kind of silence descended. It was heavy, accusatory. Alistair stood by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing, demonic shadows across his face. He believed he finally had me captive. "No audience now, Eleanor," he began, his voice low and predatory. "No one to be charmed by your performance. Let's talk about the ledgers, the discrepancies my accountants found dating back to my brother's illness." This was his attack, direct, brutal. He expected me to crumble, to deny, to weep. I simply tilted my head. "Which discrepancies?" I asked. "The ones from the Northumbrian textile investments, or the funds redirected from the Argentine shipping venture?" The question stunned him. His attack was meant to be a cannon blast. I had met it by asking for the precise calibration of his weapon. He frowned, a fissure of uncertainty in his granite expression. "You know of the Argentine venture?" "Of course," I said, trailing my fingers over a leather-bound volume. "My husband and I discussed it at length. I advised him against it. Caspian was exceptionally persuasive, however." That was the first crack. The story sold to him, to the entire family, was that of a doting but foolish duke led astray by an avaricious wife. My specific knowledge of a failed investment, and my documented opposition to it in my husband's journals, did not fit. He stared at me, his mind clearly racing to reconcile this new piece of information with the carefully constructed narrative of my guilt. He chose to ignore it. "Caspian has been my family's most loyal counsel. He has worked tirelessly to protect this estate from external influences." The defense was too quick, too vehement. He defended his cousin with the ferocity of a man defending a part of himself, a belief so foundational he couldn't bear to question it. It was the second suspicious behavior, not from Caspian, but from Alistair himself. Willful blindness. I walked over to my late husband's mahogany desk and sat in the chair, a move I knew he considered the height of presumption. The firelight glinted off the polished brass key, still in the central lock. "You even occupy his chair," Alistair scoffed, his anger returning. "Is nothing sacred to you?" My eyes remained on the desk, on the intricate wood grain my husband had so loved. Alistair saw a trophy, a symbol of power I had usurped. I saw a puzzle box. He thought he knew this room, this desk, his own brother. He was mistaken. I traced a small, almost invisible scratch near the lock plate. "This key," I said, my voice barely a whisper above the storm. "It's the original, from our grandfather's time." He sneered. "A touching observation. What of it?" I finally looked up, meeting his cold, judgmental gaze. A truth was a key of another sort, one that could unlock a mind prisoned by lies. "It is," I said softly, my gaze fixed on the lock. "But it is not the only key my husband used for this desk." Alistair's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "A second key? How wonderfully dramatic, Eleanor. Did you have it forged for this little performance?" I ignored him. My hand went not to the lock, but to the carved lion's head on the desk's right leg. I pressed its left eye, a piece of inlaid obsidian, and then twisted the small brass ring in its mouth. There was a low, wooden groan from within the desk's pedestal. A section of the ornate paneling receded, revealing a small, dark cavity. Alistair fell silent. He had spent his entire childhood in this room and had never known. From the darkness, I withdrew a small, flat key of tarnished silver. It was not a key for the main lock. I inserted it into a tiny, almost invisible keyhole nestled within the filigree of the primary brass lock plate. With a soft click, a false bottom on the uppermost left-hand drawer sprang open, revealing a slim compartment beneath. Inside was not a full ledger, but a single folded document. I placed it on the polished mahogany between us. The silence in the room became a roaring vacuum, filled only by the lashing rain and Alistair's ragged breathing. He stared at the document as if it were a coiled serpent. He saw forgery. He saw my hand in it, a desperate attempt to deflect blame. He could not yet allow himself to see the simpler, more terrible truth. Finally, he snatched it up. His eyes scanned the page, his knuckles white. I knew what he was seeing. It was a shipping manifest for the Argentine venture, dated 2 months before my husband's death. It detailed a cargo of industrial machinery that was never purchased. At the bottom, authorizing the release of funds, were 2 signatures. The first was his brother's, weak and spidery from illness. The second, firm and confident, was Lord Caspian Thorne's. "A forgery," he hissed, tossing the paper back onto the desk. "You coerced a dying man and forged Caspian's signature to cover your tracks. My God, you are more depraved than I imagined." This was the moment. The accusation that should have broken me. The point where any innocent woman would have erupted in tears and frantic denials. I met his gaze, my own expression unreadable. "Look at the date, Alistair. Then look at the signature of the Port Authority in Buenos Aires. It was countersigned on receipt." I paused, letting the implication land. "I was with your brother at our country estate that entire week. I never left his side." He froze, his mind working furiously. The timeline didn't fit. The logistics of my supposed crime were impossible. If I was with my husband and the document was signed across the ocean, then I could not be the architect of the fraud. His entire narrative, so clean and simple, was fracturing before his eyes. The scandal was no longer about a greedy widow. It was about a traitor inside his own walls. "My brother was ill," he finally choked out, his voice raw with a new, deeper pain. "He was confused. Caspian was helping him. You must have manipulated him from afar, turned him against his own cousin." He was grasping, desperate to hold on to the world he knew. He was protecting the idea of his loyal cousin, the integrity of his family name. He needed me to be the villain, because the alternative was unthinkable. I let the silence hang for a beat, heavy with the unspoken. Then, I delivered the blow that would change everything. "He wasn't confused, Alistair," I said, my voice soft but clear as glass. "He knew. Before the end, he knew everything, and it is what killed him." His denial died on his lips. The words, "It is what killed him," hung in the air, a poison that had finally been named. Alistair stared at me, but he wasn't seeing a manipulative widow anymore. He was seeing the ghost of his brother, and a betrayal so profound it bordered on sacrilege. The storm outside began to subside, its fury spent. The timing was, as always, perfect. He visibly recoiled from me, pacing to the window and back. "This is a lie, a monstrous, self-serving lie to save yourself." But the conviction had bled from his voice, leaving only raw, desperate disbelief. "Is it?" I remained seated, my hands resting calmly on the arms of the chair. "Then leave the document here. Burn it. Return to the party and stand by your cousin's side. Tell everyone I am a mad woman. The choice is yours, Duke. It always has been." I had laid the trap. To ignore the document now would be an act of willful cowardice. To investigate it would be to admit I might be right. I had not forced him. I had simply illuminated the 2 paths before him, knowing his pride would never allow him to take the easier one. As if on cue, a servant knocked softly before opening the door. "Your Grace, the storm has passed. The carriages are being brought around." Our confinement was over. I rose slowly and walked toward the door, leaving the incriminating manifest on the desk. Alistair stood frozen, a man caught between 2 worlds. I paused at the threshold. "Are you coming?" He had no choice but to follow. We emerged from the library together, stepping back into the low hum of the remaining guests. A wave of silence washed over the room. They had seen us go in separately, under a cloud of confrontation. We returned together, shrouded in a new, unreadable tension. The air crackled with speculation. Lady Harrington's fan froze mid-flutter. I felt dozens of eyes on us, trying to decipher the story. Had the wolf tamed the lamb, or had something else entirely occurred in that locked room? Caspian moved toward us immediately, his face a perfect portrait of solicitous concern. "Alistair! Eleanor! We were so worried, trapped in there for so long." He placed a reassuring hand on his cousin's arm. This was the moment I had engineered. I watched Alistair's face as Caspian touched him. I saw a barely perceptible flinch, the first tremor of revulsion. I smiled. A small, sad smile that conceded nothing. The Duke was simply ensuring the estate's historical records were safe from the damp, Caspian. He is ever so diligent. I looked from Alistair's rigid, pale face to Caspian's easy charm. "You taught him that, I imagine. My husband always said you had the finest mind for preservation in the family." The compliment was a dagger wrapped in silk. To Caspian, it was flattery. To Alistair, it was a confirmation. Preservation. Preserving the family name while bleeding it dry. Caspian's smile tightened by a fraction of an inch, the only sign he felt the barb. He saw my comment as a petty jab from a woman scorned. Alistair, however, saw the monstrous hypocrisy I was highlighting. He saw the predator hiding in his own house. I did not wait for a reply. I gave a slight nod to them both and began to walk away, my task for the evening complete. The whispers followed me like a wake. I had not raised my voice, had not made a single accusation. I had simply placed two men in a room, armed one with a sliver of truth, and allowed the social pressure to do the rest. Alistair did not follow me. He remained standing next to his cousin, a statue of conflict, the entire room watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. They all thought the game was between him and me. They were wrong. The real game was about to begin, and he was finally ready to play. The remaining guests departed in a flurry of silks and confused whispers. When the last carriage had rolled down the gravel drive, Alistair turned, his face a mask of cold fury. He did not look at me, he looked at his cousin. "Caspian," he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "My study. Now." He then glanced at me, a silent command. I was not being summoned as a defendant. I was being called as a witness. Caspian's charming demeanor finally faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Alistair, this is hardly the time. We are all exhausted. Whatever fantasy Lady Eleanor has spun—" "Now," Alistair repeated, the single word echoing like a gunshot in the grand hall. He turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. The study was the same room my husband had used to run the entire Ravenscroft empire. Bookshelves soared to the ceiling, a silent council of history and law. Alistair stood behind the great desk, no longer its invader, but its master. Caspian entered with a dismissive sigh, still playing the part of the indulgent relative. I closed the doors behind us, the sound sealing the three of us in with the impending truth. Alistair placed the single manifest on the desk. "Explain this." Caspian laughed, a hollow theatrical sound. "My dear cousin, you cannot possibly be taking this seriously. A piece of paper produced by a desperate woman. Her grief has clearly unhinged her. Look at it. My signature is a laughable forgery." "Is it?" Alistair asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because it matches every other signature of yours on every financial document for the last 5 years. I have spent the last hour in the records room confirming it." The blood drained from Caspian's face. The charming mask cracked, revealing the panicked scavenger beneath. "She poisoned you against me. She's a witch, a viper you welcomed into this family." "She did not have to," Alistair interrupted, his gaze flicking to me for a fraction of a second. "My brother did it for her." He looked back at Caspian. "He left a record." "Lies!" Caspian spat, his voice rising. "Whatever he wrote in his final deluded days, It was my turn. I moved from the shadows near the door, my steps silent on the thick Persian rug. I walked not to Alistair's desk, but to the towering fireplace. To the right of the mantel was a carving of the family crest. I pressed the falcon's eye. A section of the wood-paneled wall clicked open, revealing a hidden safe. Alistair stared, his shock palpable. It was another secret of this house he'd never known. From the safe, I withdrew the true prize, a thick, leather-bound ledger. I placed it on the desk with a soft, final thud. It lay there between them, the irrefutable truth. Years of Caspian's treachery documented in my late husband's methodical hand. Caspian looked at the book and broke. The collapse was total. His bravado, his charm, his entire identity evaporated, leaving a trembling, pathetic creature. Alistair looked at him with nothing but contempt. "Get out of my house." There was no shouting, no violence, just the quiet, absolute death of a reputation. Caspian stumbled from the room, a broken man. The silence he left behind was profound. Alistair finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a storm of shame, confusion, and a terrible dawning respect. The power between us had not just shifted, it had been inverted. He thought he had been hunting a traitor. He was right. He had simply been pointing his weapon at the wrong shadow, all along. A month later, I stood in the library, the afternoon sun warming the mahogany desk. Opposite me, Alistair reviewed the true ledgers, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence between us was no longer a weapon, but a shared space of sober understanding. Lord Caspian Thorne was gone. The official story, whispered with grim satisfaction in drawing rooms across London, was of a gambling addiction spiraling into ruin. A quiet, managed disgrace designed to cauterize the wound before it festered. It was my suggestion. And Alistair, now my unwilling confidant, had agreed without question. The family's reputation was preserved. My promise to his brother was kept. Alistair finally looked up from the numbers, his eyes holding a weariness that went beyond fatigue. It was the weight of a world rebuilt on a foundation of lies he once believed to be true. "He was my brother," he said, his voice low. "I thought I was protecting his legacy from you. All this time, he was trying to protect me from them." I offered a slight nod. My husband knew Alistair's fierce loyalty was both his greatest strength and his most exploitable weakness. He knew his brother would never believe a simple accusation, especially from me. He would have to be led to the truth, forced to uncover it with his own hands, so that the discovery would be absolute. It was a cruel, necessary path, and he had entrusted me to guide Alistair along it. Alistair shook his head, a ghost of a bitter smile on his lips. "That night, the storm. I thought I had trapped you, that fate had delivered you into my hands." I turned to look out the window at the calm, sun-drenched gardens, remembering the fury of the wind and rain. He saw an accident, a chance encounter. He and everyone else who watched us that night had misunderstood the nature of the cage. They thought they witnessed a storm trapping a wolf and a lamb in a room. They never realized the lamb had summoned the storm.